All right, good morning everyone. This is Steve Gay from Interwest Consulting Group, and I would like to welcome you all to our webinar this morning. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to give a few folks a few more minutes to log in. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to our webinar this morning. My name is Steve Gay from Interwest Consulting Group. We're going to have a webinar today talking about GIS and SharePoint integration with enterprise systems and focusing on a lot of the examples that are in place at the City of Elk Grove. With me today on the webinar is Mohammed Ahmed, Mary Ellen Roseborough, and Todd Lighthizer. They're going to be available to answer any of your questions that you might submit along the way. If you do have questions, please feel free to use the chat within the GoToWebinar function. We'll do our best to answer some of those questions as we're going through the presentation. And if there's some questions that we're not able to get to, we'll try to send you an email follow-up after the event. I did also want to note that we are recording the webinar today. So if some of your coworkers weren't able to make it, we'll provide you with a link to access that recording after the event. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're Interwest Consulting Group, and so as a local government contractor, we provide staffing and project services to city and county governments across the western region. The variety of many of our clients are in California, and we provide services in a variety of business lines. So that includes engineering, building and safety, real estate, public works, construction management, as well as IT and GIS services. And those are the services that we're going to be talking about significantly here today. I mentioned we're going to focus in on the City of Elk Grove and the services that we provide there. The GIS department for Interwest has been working with the City of Elk Grove since their incorporation, and we have established a variety of services and solutions that have really created efficiencies and workflows throughout the city government. Some of the items and topics that we're going to focus on today are listed here on the screen. they're all sort of related to the enterprise integration that we've deployed. The platforms that we'll talk about include Microsoft SharePoint and SQL database. All the services that GIS interfaces with are built on the Esri platform, and so we'll talk about the tools and products that we have deployed there. And the enterprise software that's used at the City of Elk Grove is Sungard Public Sector. And we'll focus in on a couple of examples of how we've integrated with the Sungard software, both putting data into that system and pulling data out of that system. Some of the information product or subject matter that we'll focus on will be the SharePoint platform called the Management Console at the City of Elk Grove, which has become a really reliable resource for sharing information to city staff. We'll talk about capital improvement data and some of the workflows that have been put in place using all of the tools and platforms mentioned here. And then integrating the data from Sungard, focusing on the work order system and the assets that are used there. And we'll mention a variety of the tools and techniques that we're using to create this automation and integration functionality. An important aspect of the City of Elk Grove's architecture is shown here on the screen, hosted versus on-premise. And it's a really important distinction as we talk about some of the solutions that we'll discuss here today. The city has found some great opportunities to utilize hosted services. So one of the main examples of that is the Sungard platform. They use the Sungard ASP solutions for Naviline in one solution. We'll talk about the migration and the history of that here in a second. Esri software we now use ARCGIS Online for organizations to deploy services, data, web maps, and application on the cloud to both citizens and staff. And also the city uses a third-party web hosting company to deploy their website. Within the city's domain network, the two resources that we'll talk mostly about today are SharePoint and ARCGIS server, which is built, we're using SDE and SQL. And so I put this in there to give you that distinction between these two environments, because the key here for our services is finding the right tools and integration points that connect those two environments in an efficient and effective way, so as to take advantage of those internal services on-premise, and when necessary, deploy resources and data on the cloud through that hosted environment. So Sungard Public Sector, as I mentioned, is the city's enterprise software. They're using the ASP solutions from Sungard, and over the last many years, the city has used Naviline for all of their enterprise solutions. And over the last about year and a half, the city's been migrating from Naviline into one solution. And so the two modules that are categories, if you will, that are completed are the communities and the finance. Right now, the work order, the work management system is in the current migration into one solution. And so we'll talk about some of the examples of, about how that has worked within Naviline and how we see it evolving into the one solution platform. Some more information about the city's GIS environment. Following that on-premise and cloud distinction, I mentioned that on-premise we have ARCGIS server. So we have a variety of database and map services established, feature classes for nearly every asset, and land development tracking data within the city is stored within the city's ARCGIS server SDE SQL database. We have a fully functional multi-user database with versioning to support both our production and development environment, and we deploy those through map services to both our desktop users for GIS staff, and then map services for applications and distribution into third-party systems. ARCGIS Online has become a significantly valuable resource for the city. With that cloud solution, we're now able to deploy web mapping applications and data and services outside of the city's domain network. We'll talk about some of the processes that we've used in order to do that, but the great value here is that we can now deploy that data online, and it's accessible to the general public through the city's website, as well as field crews through mobile activities such as ARCGIS collector application. And a little bit about the past mapping tools. The city has been using GeoBlade and Vantage Point for the last several years. We're in the process of migrating those applications into an ARCGIS Online web mapping application, which has really presented an opportunity to create streamlined web maps that are really simple and straightforward to use. The features and functions give our users the ability to zoom in and drill down on the data in those maps very quickly and efficiently, as well as the ability for our staff to quickly create focused maps and applications to our users' needs. And the last component is SharePoint that we'll talk about. And SharePoint at the City of Elk Grove has become an invaluable resource for staff. The city has established SharePoint as an intranet site, and they branded it as what they call ElkNet. And that branding, I think, was one of the key functions that made that site and that resource successful. After branding that as ElkNet, staff are able to commonly refer to the resource of ElkNet, and they say things like, have you checked ElkNet for XYZ? Have you seen that list in ElkNet? Did you check ElkNet? So that, again, is very important in the branding to make that site and resource valuable. Within that intranet site, we've created a section called the Management Console. And within the Management Console, there's a variety of GIS and One Solution integration components that we have deployed. And so the Management Console in this case represents links or lists to other valuable resources. For example, the GIS data that's stored in SQL has been extracted into SQL reports to show a certain number of features for a particular feature class, or summary of a certain attribute type. So that's a great example of that is for our drainage infrastructure. The drainage team, when they have to do annual reporting, they're able to go to a SQL report and see the total number of manholes or drain inlets that are currently in place within the city. And this makes their reporting much easier than it would be in the past. In addition to pulling data out of GIS, we can also pull information out of One Solution. And we'll talk about some more specific examples of how that's done shortly. But a couple of just quick notes on the Management Console is, for example, contact management. This is a module within One Solution that the city uses to track contacts from citizens, both when a call or an email comes in as a customer request or a complaint. This system is used to track that from acceptance to resolution, and the Management Console is used by extracting that information from One Solution and displaying open and current activity in SharePoint so that executive management is able to log into SharePoint quickly and easily without having to use One Solution in every case. So they can see the status and notes of all of the calls. And a very similar scenario for public works projects. Information about projects is extracted from One Solution and displayed within a SharePoint list that's updated quickly and automatically. So before we go on, I want to take a second to do a poll to find out how some of you might be using SharePoint. So I'm going to run this poll. And if you wouldn't mind taking a second to indicate how, if you're using SharePoint, how you're using it. Please note that you can select more than one option in this case. Excellent. All right, I think we have quite a good response there. I'm going to go ahead and give you about another 10 seconds before I close that poll. All right, we're going to close that, and I'll go ahead and share the results just to give everybody a quick visual. So a lot of people are using it for an intranet site similar to Elk Grove. And then second place looks like project management. So those are some great ways to use SharePoint. And a few people are not using SharePoint. So maybe today you'll see some ideas that help spark your interest and find some ways to possibly use SharePoint. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that and jump back into our presentation here. So here's the city's intranet on SharePoint. So as I mentioned, this is a great place for staff to, when they log into their Internet Explorer, this is the page that they see. And so it's really become a reliable resource to see current announcements, training opportunities, links out to the department pages. So staff can find shortcuts to the IT department or the GIS department, and access all of the important resources that each of the departments shares through this page, this site. Focusing in on the management console within the SharePoint ElkNet platform. As I mentioned, this component of SharePoint has become a central hub for information from a variety of resources across the city. Pulling in reports and data from different systems has made this site really reliable. The one area that we're going to focus on today is the capital improvement project list. And I'll go into some discussion about what the workflows are that take advantage of this SharePoint list at the front end and how that information gets distributed and shared across the city. Some of the requirements that we had as we implemented this integration was to create a location and a tool that staff in the Public Works Department could use to easily update the project stage and simple information or attributes about their capital projects. In the past, this had to be done manually through Excel and exchanging emails back and forth between staff, and it was not efficient. We also needed to make sure that the GIS staff who was maintaining the geometry, the spatial features, points, lines, and polygons about each capital project were still able to use the tools that they were familiar with in order to maintain that accurate and precise GIS data. And then from a delivery standpoint, we needed to be able to create maps and lists on the city's website that were quickly updated and accurate. And then, of course, reduce the manual tasks that are required to do that so that it can become frequent and accurate and consistent. So this is an overview kind of slide of what the steps and components that are in place in order to make all of that happen. So as I mentioned, the data starts in SharePoint, and that's the primary source for these specific detailed attributes. We extract the data, move it into SQL using SSIS packages. The data gets associated with the GIS features and becomes a spatial view, and then we use automated processes to export that and push it into ARCGIS Online with Python. So focusing in on the SharePoint list of the data, this is a view of that data in SharePoint. It's a very simple list, but it lists out all of the projects that are current, active, and important to display online and on web maps. And of course, the key feature there is that project number, and that's one of the components that you use to relate the data to the GIS feature once it gets to GIS. And now zooming in and bringing up some detail about one of those projects. So I mentioned one of the requirements in developing this was to provide our public works staff a simple way to change information about their data. The end product needed to have a web map and a list, but a map that was color-coded by the stage that it's in. So you can see the different stages that a project might change from and to. With this tool, staff can log in and open up a project by editing the details and change that and save it. And that information gets stored into this SharePoint list, pushed into SQL, and you'll see that show up later in our process. And I also wanted to point out the next attribute right below that says on public site. And that's another attribute that staff can change from yes to no, which serves as a filter in the data lists and maps, that if they don't want that particular project to show online because it hasn't reached a certain approval status or something like that, they can change that and it'll filter off of the map and the list. So as the data is stored and updated in SharePoint, I mentioned that we are able to use automated jobs in SQL Server to run SSIS packages that transfer the data out of SharePoint and put it into GIS. And once the data gets into GIS, then it can be associated with the core GIS geometry. So as I said, our staff maintains points, lines, and polygons depending on the aspect of that that capital project, roadways or sites, bus stop improvements, areas of improvement. They all get their respective GIS geometry type, and then we have spatial views set up that join the data out of SQL with the GIS feature class. So that data, as it becomes a spatial view, is then pushed and published out to ARCGIS Online using our Python scripts. So those Python scripts take an MXD from ArcGIS and compile that and publish it into ARCGIS Online, into our organizational account, which then is used for a variety of online services. So this is a screenshot of the city's ARCGIS Online for Organization account. It's our home page, and I wanted to give you just kind of a sense for what that looks like as I'm at the point in the process where the data is coming from the internal domain out to the cloud. And before I go into what happens to the data in the cloud, I wanted to do another poll and just find out a little bit about your GIS environment. So I'm going to go ahead and launch another poll here, and if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to tell us what GIS software you're using. And again, you can check all that apply in this case. All right, very good. I'm going to spend another 5 or 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that and share the results with everyone here. Excellent. So we've got a lot of people using the Esri software, which is great to hear. Quite a few people using ARCGIS Online too. Over half of us are using ARCGIS Online as well. So great. We're going to talk about components of all of those things there too. So go ahead and hide that poll and jump back into our presentation here. So the data, the capital improvement data, to my example here, has now been moved into ARCGIS Online. There's a screenshot of what it might look like. I'm actually going to jump over to the city's live website right now and give you an idea of what happens when the data is hosted and published online. So you can see this is the City of Elk Grove's website, elkgrovecity.org. This is a fully hosted website that we're able to embed the web mapping application and data within that site. So this frame right here that you can see is exactly the same data that is and information and view of the information that is in fact the web map. So this is an interactive web map. You can see that each of those features displayed on the map is the same GIS data that was displayed in ArcGIS Desktop. We can zoom in, and we can click on one of these features, and we can see a pop-up of those very simple attributes, with the project stage being that which displays the symbology of the web map. So I'm going to jump back to our slides here. Another component that is really useful with the ARCGIS Online hosted environment is there is hosted feature services and REST endpoints for all of the data and feature services. So what I have on the screen here is a view of that REST endpoint for the SharePoint list data that is mined out of SharePoint and deployed into ARCGIS Online. And the reason this is valuable is because Esri has exposed through their API and query functions the ability to get a query and run against those features and attributes a query that will return a variety of different formats, one of which is a JSON string. And that JSON string can then be captured and integrated into other applications, and in this case, a tabular style is configured using that JSON string and displays the attributes into a list format. And so each of those features each of the items on that list that you see specifically relate to the data that is displayed on the web map. So I'm going to jump back over into our presentation. Jump on to our next slide here. So I wanted to kind of reiterate what the value that we're now seeing once this process is in place. I connected all the lines to sort of give the sense that this process now happens automatically with scheduled routines without the need for regular staff intervention. And that's extremely important. to note, because once an item is updated and modified in SharePoint, be it a project stage or show online attribute, yes, no, scheduled routines now pull that data out into SQL service, into SQL. They integrate it with the GIS and the Spatial View. They publish it to ARCGIS Online, and that happens regularly and automatically. So now staff does not have to follow the manual tasks that they did in the past, which was update attributes and records in Excel. Send that to the GIS department. Ask them to update and associate those attributes with their GIS features. And the GIS staff doesn't have to export and upload shapefiles to a web-hosted application. So just to reiterate, the value here is that this process is very automatic and very reliable, and staff can focus on using the data rather than detailed steps of maintaining the data. So before we jump into our Sungard examples, I wanted to take a second to do a quick poll about your enterprise software. So I'm going to go ahead and launch another poll. What enterprise software are you using? So please take a second to fill in that poll. In this case, you can only select one, assuming you're not using more than one. And for those of you that are selecting other, if you're interested and willing, please don't hesitate to enter in the name of the other software that you're using into the chat box. That would be useful for us to hear about later if you're interested. Excellent. All right, we're going to give that another 5 seconds or so. And we'll go ahead and close that and share the results. All right, well, we have a tie between Sungard and Tyler Technologies. That's excellent. Those are solutions that we've both, those are both solutions that we've provided assistance and support implementing and integrating with. So Sungard is the one that we'll talk more about today, because that's the City of Elk Grove's primary enterprise system. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the results of that and jump back into our presentation. Sungard, one of their applications is called Naviline, and I'm guessing that a lot of you that are using Sungard probably have been using Naviline for a number of years, and it's been used both for the community and land management modules at the city, as well as work orders and asset management. And what I have listed here are the integration requirements that the GIS department has been working with over the last several years. From the land management side, we manage the process that brings assessor parcel data in from the county assessor, and we geoprocess it, we massage it, we clean it when needed, and we provide feedback to the assessor when necessary. But in the end, we produce a file that's ready for import into that land management system. After we put data in, we also provide a significant amount of data extracts. So we pull data out for GIS maps to display in a variety of locations, and then of course the SharePoint display of information that we talked about through that management console. We don't just pull the data out and make a map out of it. We also provide analysis services to our users, and so that's an example of that might be how many permits have been issued within a certain maintenance district, or how many permits have been issued under a certain land use category, or how many fees have been collected within a certain finance district. And those are all functions that are just not available and not possible within the enterprise software for spatial analysis, and that's one way that GIS can really provide a value-added component to your enterprise software. On the work order asset management side, similar importing of data into Naviline. Our GIS data was the primary source of asset information when that system was implemented. And so what we're talking about here is like street lights or drain inlets, manholes, all the things that our work order crews need in order to figure out where assets are in order to do preventative maintenance or repairs of various features throughout the city. We again pull data out of Naviline through work orders to display in maps and statuses through SharePoint. And then another component is field data capture. And that again represents our asset inventory. On this particular slide, the activity has really been based on a very manual process using Trimble GPS units to capture data, move that from the Trimble software into the Esri SDE platform, and then load into assets for work orders. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that process has significantly improved. Just a sort of a simple diagram approach to talk about that data integration with Naviline. In this case, we're talking about pulling information out. So Naviline is built on an AS400 platform. In order to pull that information out, we worked with Sungard to have them establish logical views of the data in the database. We use automated SQL routines to extract that data out and put it into SDE. And then that data gets, again, associated with a location to create and become a spatial view. In this case, we use the asset ID for a work order and associate it with the asset ID of an actual asset, indicating that a work order has been created associated with that asset, like a street light. So an example there is if a work order is created to repair a street light, that work order gets associated with the appropriate street light, and then when it gets displayed into a map, it's properly located at that XY location on top of that asset location, which we do through map services. And up to in the past, we've used the third-party map interface called GeoBlade to display that information with its relationship back to the assets and the work orders. So Sungard, their newest flagship product is called OneSolution, and I've mentioned a handful of times the city's in the process of migrating into that platform. A significant amount of work has been done to move into the OneSolution. The communities and finance areas have been completed, and the significant effort right now is moving the work management work order system out of Naviline into OneSolution, and that is underway right now. So some of the examples that I'll show here will focus in a little bit about what we're in the process of doing and implementing. Nice, a simple screenshot showing the OneSolution community module there. Just the different components within the city that are utilizing OneSolution. So code enforcement, business account management, planning and engineering, building permits. Land management on the top right is one of the most important aspects there, because that's the area that addresses and owner information are exchanged into and out of. And so some of the examples, again, we'll talk about have to do with that process. So OneSolution and the GIS integration additional requirements. So beyond the basic requirements that we saw listed with Naviline, we now have new requirements and I'd say new opportunities to integrate in a much more efficient and effective way. OneSolution is now built on a much more interactive and dynamic platform that takes advantages of services. And what that means for us at the city in the GIS department is the ability to create REST services through our GIS server that provide data to and from GIS and one solution very automatically and very efficiently. And it holds true on both the community and the work order sides of the system. And so to sort of restate the value there is one solution now has the ability to receive data through a REST service. And that REST service can be a two-way synchronization. And so I'll go right down to a screenshot or a diagram here that kind of gives a visual of that. Data stored in one solution and GIS is now connected through a synchronization. And when you get right down to the nuts and bolts of it, the benefit there is that when data needs to be changed by our public works staff using one solution assets, they're able to make those changes and they're synchronized to GIS. When GIS data gets updated from whatever source it might, whether that be desktop or field data collection, those features are added, attributes are populated, and they're accessible to the one solution work order crew and staff. And so that synchronization has really presented a significant sharing and automated workflow process enhancement. Another benefit to the users with one solution and the GIS integration is the integrated one map experience. Rather than having to only use third-party mapping applications, the staff will be able to take advantage of a single map that displays both the one solution work order data as well as GIS assets or other base layers from our ARCGIS server. And those will both be fed directly into that one map experience. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to take advantage of ARCGIS Online and our other GIS resources. Because that model allows for data to come in from GIS services automatically, we can take advantage of ARCGIS Online and very specifically for our mobile data collection. So I mentioned in the past we were using Trimble GPS units to collect and capture data. And that process, while very accurate, had a lot of overhead to it. So when we were able to use ARCGIS Online and the Esri ARCGIS for Collector, that became a much more efficient method to capture data from the field. Some examples are our streetlight inventory. I'll talk a little bit about this. We have our streetlight inventory for an LED retrofit, and the city has been replacing our streetlights across the board, and ARCGIS Online web maps and collector have become the primary data tracking tool in order to capture that information and track those changes. And this diagram here indicates that that data, as it's collected, edited, modified, can be automatically loaded into the GIS asset data, which can be accessible for work orders as well as in the one map interface. Here's an example of a web map that is set up for displaying information out of one solution. This map can be used by staff, but also field crews, or staff both in the office as well as field crews to see where work order activity is happening, and then again use it to supplement data collection activities in the field. So the two components that I mentioned, which have really presented some significant value improvements, are the one map integrated mapping experience and ARCGIS Online. So the web map, or I'm sorry, the mapping applications that were used by our work order staff in the past weren't as streamlined, and they had a lot of overhead in the attribute, identify, map pop-ups. Now the web maps and the one map, the web maps for ARCGIS Online and the one map features are much more streamlined, so staff can click in on identify features very quickly and easily. And then that integration with field data collection has been key. Our staff, our field crews are now much more inclined and interested in doing data capture and data inventory because they know that they'll be able to quickly get that integrated into whichever application they might need it accessible in. That kind of summarizes, that's kind of the end of my Sungard discussion. I did want to share a few other examples of integrations that have been put in place at the City of Elk Grove that we have provided some support for. The City of Elk Grove has a full-service police department, which includes their dispatch system. And so our GIS team is responsible for maintaining all of the GIS and all of the GIS mapping data that's used within that system. So that includes both the geometry data as well as the address, common party, and location information. All of that data is stored in Esri GIS software. We use the data interoperability extension to export, transform, and load that information into the Intergraph software that is used by our police dispatch system. I talked about the LED project. That has been a significant project here at the city. The city's saving thousands of dollars a year in electrical savings, and GIS and the Esri collector application has been the cornerstone for data tracking for that project. We have some similar examples to this CIP that we did using homeowners associations. So we track the name of a homeowners association within a SharePoint list, and our staff can make changes to the contact information. That gets pulled out associated with a GIS geometry feature that's then deployed in very similar locations. Another interesting tool within SharePoint at the city is electronic contracts. This is an example of a workflow process that has been put in place to track communication and approval of documents. Electronic contracts or staff reports all follow this process. But workflows have been created that when a particular staff member needs to submit an electronic contract or a staff report, the workflow is set up such that it alerts their supervisor that a new contract or staff report is ready for review. That supervisor can review, comment, and return the item back to them if there's comments and changes that need to be made, or they can forward it to the next level of approval, be that a director or the city manager, the city attorney, whatever the case may be in that particular workflow. So that's another example of how SharePoint has really become a reliable resource at the City of Elk Grove for workflow tracking, data integration, and information sharing. To summarize, I wanted to just point out that the slide they showed at the beginning, there is a definite hybrid environment of hosted and on-premise resources at the City of Elk Grove. And that has really presented some significant savings of time and effort. The challenge that it presents is that we needed to find the right systems that support integration in that type of an environment. And that's been the process that we've gone through in order to find those right components and right processes. So things like the one solution with data integration services has really presented a great opportunity. Esri's ARCGIS Online in the cloud with their API and their ability to receive data through Python being loaded into their system. The REST services that become available as you implement ARCGIS Online and host those data. Those were all key components that once they were in place, we were able to find opportunities and systems that really, again, save time and save money. I wanted to ask everyone, not necessarily now, you can do it into the chat box, but also I'll show our email here at the end. If there's ideas of information that you'd like to see us provide in future webinars, we would love to hear that. So feel free to provide comments about today's webinar, things you'd like to hear more about, or if there's other information that you think would be useful to hear about with respect to GIS, SharePoint, or Sungard, Tyler Technologies, any of those enterprise systems that you're interested in. Feel free to insert that information in the chat or send us a direct email. So we're almost out of time. I wanted to kind of start to wrap up. I wanted to specifically say thank you to everyone who attended the webinar today. A special thanks to the City of Elk Grove, Nicole Guttridge and her IT staff for letting us demonstrate some of these resources today. It's been really valuable to work with them and deploy these resources. I wanted to thank the MISAC members for being here today, specifically the board for their assistance in getting the word out about our webinar today. So one more reminder, we are recording this webinar, so we'll get that information out to everyone as to where you can find that. And don't hesitate to contact myself or Mohammed with any questions about what you heard today, and we really do appreciate your time. Thank you.